Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining me again. Today, I'm going to talk about vinegar. Um, just really over the years, I've kind of heard there's kind of been some questions about vinegar. Um, I've always felt good about eating vinegar, using vinegar in my recipes. And the topic really kind of resurfaced again for me. Um, in my shop, there's a few of my customers who, are asking, okay, what has vinegar? Oh, I can't eat that because I got vinegar in it. And, naturally you think like, is it that bad to avoid it completely? Is it going to make that much of a difference? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Um, obviously, this raised concern not just from standpoint of understanding and trying to gain awareness on what the few of my customers were on in terms of in terms of in terms of why they choose not to eat vinegar. Um, so so again, it just got to a point where it's like, I really should investigate this. I really should look further into this. Maybe there is something to this vinegar issue. And then of course, being a food person, I have to. This is part of my responsibility. Part of just comes with the territory that I should, if anyone, if I'm using it and I'm using it and I stand by it and I believe in it, then I should know what the adversaries are saying. So 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 basically, I a couple of days ago I put a post on my Facebook and I had a gentleman by the name of I believe he's a Dr. Elijah Grant had responded because the research I did some soft research on the internet and came up upon an article in Dr. McCullough's site. And Dr. McCullough, I don't necessarily, I respect his research, and so I may not necessarily agree with everything on his page, but he had some findings and posted some research about apple cider vinegar, and for the most part, it was positive. It wasn't something that really was that bad to the body. However, um, looking at some of the potential issues of vinegar. Now, I'm just using vinegar. I'm going to go into the types of vinegar and all of those things later in the video. However, we're just going to look at vinegar as a just as one thing. But one of the things, vinegar, okay, so vinegar is acetic acid. We're going to talk about that as well. What is acetic acid? And because of the acetic acid is a poison. No matter what type of vinegar, could be apple cider vinegar, it could be balsamic vinegar, whatever kind of vinegar. It is toxic. It can destroy your liver. It can destroy your prostate gland, harm your prostate gland. It is an active poison. What are some of the other references? There's a book called The Truth About Vinegar. I don't have that book in my library, but again, I think this is a topic worth delving into and worth discussing because, again, our food is our medicine. And on the flip side, I don't have to tell you, or I shouldn't have to tell you, that there's as much information as there is claiming that vinegar is a poison. There's information claiming that vinegar is a healer, that vinegar is beneficial, and that there's numerable benefits doing the right kind of vinegar. That's the key thing. So we're going to get into that. So again, what is acetic acid? Now, I don't claim to necessarily be a chemist or a scientist on that level. I'm a food scientist in terms of creating food and balancing flavors. However, acetic acid, again, I mean, if it was such, I mean, I like to dumb things down in terms of, if it's a poison, I mean, I would be dead. As much vinegar as I've eaten over the years. So it's certainly not literally a poison. Is it toxic? That's another question. That's a different question. And again, that's what we're trying to answer today. Now, if we look at the process of vinegar, according to, I'm going to pull this up, according to the good peoples at Bragg apple cider vinegar, I'm going to pull that up. No, it's the wrong thing here. Because one of the things, that I've found in my experience with working with food is the form is everything. I mean, if we look at all the things that get typically demonized, because that's one of the things I also say, all food can be demonized, but the form is everything. So if we look at fat, fat has certainly been demonized, from saturated fats to trans fatty acids and down the line. But we find that the research is proven that the form is everything. So we need fat. No one can argue that we should eat a low-fat diet or a no-fat diet. That is dangerous. However, the kinds of fat, we should not be eating fried foods, and we should not be eating certain types of fats that have been heavily processed. The processing is everything. But if we're eating healthy fats, they're actually healing us. They're actually nourishing us. They're actually giving us what we need, what our body is craving. So again, it's not fat. It's what we do to the fat before we put it into our body. Largely. Same with sugar. I can have, if I had a bag of white sugar right here, and if I had a bag, or if I had a container of either raw honey or coconut nectar or even raw agave, there's going to be a difference in terms of the effect on your body. And then now we turn to vinegar. Now, one of the things that when we look at the different kinds of vinegar, definitely would you say that just like all fats are not created equal, all sugars are not created equal, all vinegars are not created equal. Vinegar, I think one of the strongest vinegars that on the market that we have is white vinegar. And again, I can probably make the same analogy between white vinegar and white sugar, it being very detrimental to your body, very detrimental to your health. I think all the things that they've claimed that vinegar can do in terms of on a toxic level, white vinegar is guilty of. In terms of destroying your liver, in terms of causing candida, in terms of harming your prostate gland or your reproductive organs, your esophagus, your stomach lining. These are all the things that people are claiming that raw vinegar, minimally processed vinegar can do. I would certainly beg to differ. Again, according to on Bragg.com, there was a frequently asked questions. Let's see here, download. Let's click on that. Okay, so one of the things, I'm not going to really look into that. One of the things, because there's a book, obviously they've written, the miracle health system outside of vinegar. You can read that. But one thing in terms of looking at let's go to, actually I found something. Okay, what is Bragg Organic apple cider vinegar? Bragg Organic apple cider vinegar is the best, highest quality available in the world today. Blah, blah, blah. Organic, unfiltered. That's one of the things that is important. If you're going to have any vinegar, it should be unfiltered. That pectin, that residue you find at the bottom floating is very important. And you want to, while it's not fiber, it contains that good stuff, what they call the mother of vinegar. These contain beneficial molecules, enzymes that have benefits to our health, and so this is that's important. Certainly, you're not going to get that with if you buy vinegar in the store. A lot of it, or most of it, probably has been filtered. We don't want to use a filtered vinegar. It's the same thing with olive oil. People have demonized olive oil. They claim that it's not natural, or that it's basically there's something wrong with pressing the olive or pressing the oil out the olive and being able to use it as a food. I mean, this has been done since the beginning of time. Olives are oily food that we can use, and it actually is very healing, nourishing, beneficial to us. And I find that vinegar we can put in the same category. We can ferment certain foods, and in minimal amounts they can have benefits. They certainly are not going to destroy us, whether it's in the form of cancer or causing some kind of deterioration of our internal system, whether it's our organs or whatever the case. So back to my blurb here. As a chef, I mean, you certainly get into, in terms of taste, the certain taste. So one thing I've found is that the more intense a food is, whether it's an intense sweet, an intense sour, an intense salt, that gives an indication in terms of its nutritional benefit or non-benefit. So, for example, like today or in the last few years, as a sweetener, I've used primarily coconut nectar. Now, I find that to be a sweetener that is not very sweet, at least compared to other sweeteners like agave, for example. Agave, to me, is very sweet. So that's a good example right there. And I think if we take that with vinegar, the stronger vinegars are probably the more toxic vinegars, and the lighter vinegar. So if you have an issue with apple cider vinegar, then I would say use some of the milder vinegars. The coconut vinegar. Coconut vinegar is very mild. The other vinegars on the market that I've used over the years: balsamic vinegar, red wine vinegar. Balsamic vinegar is pretty strong in terms of its flavor. The red wine vinegar, I'd put it probably on par with the apple cider vinegar. And then another option is wine. You could also use wine to get that sour flavor, because it comes back to flavor in terms of creating a recipe. So if you have a recipe and you want that sour to be represented, there's different options that you can use in place of vinegar. And then obviously, probably the most common, and people would agree the most healthy, is lemon and or lime. But the thing is that as a chef, the lemon and lime, they definitely have a certain flavor and a certain taste that doesn't, as a chef, doesn't necessarily work with certain dishes. So yes, can you use lemon and lime in place of vinegar with any dish that you would use vinegar? Absolutely. However, sometimes using vinegar, you need a little stronger representation in terms of that sourness that you want to get. And I guess the question of the day is like, is that going to be a detriment? Is using the vinegar in place of lemon or lime in terms of creating a dressing, or creating a soup, or creating something in that realm, is using vinegar detrimental? I say that if you're using a mild vinegar or organic, raw, and over the long term, absolutely not. In fact, and I just want to read through some of the highlights of the McCullough article. Okay, so latest research, I'm just going to highlight some of the things. The latest research found that so they had three groups that was divided, a study of 29 people. This was a 2004 study. And from people with diabetes, 1/3 have been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, 1/3 pre-diabetic signs, and 1/3 was healthy. All three, the results were quite significant. All three groups had better glucose readings with vinegar than with the placebo. the people with pre-diabetic symptoms benefited the most from the vinegar, cutting their blood glucose concentration by nearly half. People with diabetes the people with diabetes improved their blood glucose levels by 25% with vinegar. People with pre-diabetic symptoms had lower blood glucose than the healthy participants after both drank vinegar. I mean, again, this is you can go on Mercola.com, search apple cider vinegar and look at the study for yourself. Vinegar and blood pressure. 2006, one study showed that vinegar could lower cholesterol in laboratory rats. Another study found that blood pressure can be lowered by the acetic acid in vinegar. However, of course, this is rats, not people, so they do make a note of that. Possible cancer combatant. There's some positive preliminary research suggesting that apple cider vinegar can help prevent cancer. There are a few laboratory studies found that vinegar can kill cancer cells or slow their growth. However, that study is inconclusive. But it does raise the question. And then they say the gnarlier the better. Of course, when purchasing apple cider vinegar, you want to make sure that you want to avoid the perfectly clear variety. You want to go for the unfiltered, unprocessed, the murky. The murkier the better. So that lets you know that is good quality. So basically, vinegar is really a certain kind of wine. They say that long ago someone stored a keg of wine too long, presumably a poorly sealed one that allowed oxygen in. When the eager drinkers opened it, they found a sour liquid instead of a wine. The name vinegar comes from the French words sour wine. Okay, should apple cider vinegar be used? Again, we all have to, it ultimately comes down to us. Certainly, avoiding vinegar is not going to hurt you. But we find that using vinegar, especially as a chef, certainly you want to have different tools, different options to create different flavors. And sometimes if I'm creating like if I'm making a light dressing, then I want to use a light sour, so I'm going to use lemon and lime. But if I'm making a strong, heavier dressing, then I want a strong sour with that, so I'm going to use a vinegar. Most of the times I'm using apple cider vinegar, but if you want to use vinegar, I would say, and use a light vinegar, the coconut vinegar is very light. It doesn't have that strong sour punch that the apple cider vinegar or the red wine vinegar has. And like I said, you want to definitely be using the unfiltered vinegar. So I believe that just to highlight some of the things here, definitely the form. One of my maxims is raw is law, and the form is everything. Just like it's dangerous to use white sugar, it's dangerous to use white vinegar. I don't think you can cross that parallel in terms of saying like what you can say negative about white vinegar, you can say negative about apple cider vinegar, or even red wine vinegar, or balsamic vinegar, and certainly not coconut vinegar, which is a new item relatively compared to apple cider vinegar. Using wine, actually, when I got started as a raw food chef, a lot of the recipes that I had, called for the use of either red wine or white wine. So, if you don't like vinegar, using wine, in minimal amounts is not going to destroy your liver. And then also I feel like, obviously, I would be curious to look at more research, but as a as a raw food person for the last 15 years, it's the same thing with the question I had asked even myself is, when we looked at, and I talk about this in my book. This is my book here. I talk about this in my book is because this is mainly about detoxification. So I talk a lot about water, and one of the questions I raise is should you only drink coconut water if you have that option? And my answer to that is yes. There are people who have written about coconut water and who said that you should not replace coconut water with your regular water. So why am I bringing this up? Because I number one, just the way that coconut water makes me feel, and then just my own intuitive vibe. I feel like the coconut water is worth taking the risk, because in terms of any long-term effects, so 50 years from now, will I regret not drinking more plain water versus coconut water? That's a risk I'm willing to take. I'm willing to, you can look at me as the subject, the test subject 50 years from now and say, did that coconut water help him or hurt him? I like to believe that it's going to help me. And so I'm rolling with that. And I think with vinegar, in terms of any long-term potential effects, like it talks about, like, as a man, I have a prostate gland. Obviously, prostate cancer is epidemic, especially among men of color. So that's certainly that, I'm concerned about. What are some of the other long-term, your liver, obviously, or just creating imbalances in your body. I'm willing to gamble on my own health in terms of the long term, because obviously, from my experience, there hasn't been any short-term negative effects, and I'm sure anyone who has had vinegar, even white vinegar, has not felt anything detrimental in terms of their short-term effect. So, with all that said, the jury is still out on the subject, but as far as the question, should we eat vinegar? My answer is yes. And, obviously there are exceptions, in terms of the form, the type. You want to definitely do a raw, unfiltered, minimally processed. And then, last but not least, it's a flavoring. Unlike soy, which when we look at soy, traditionally, soy was beneficial when used more so as a flavoring, not as a protein. I'm not making meals or even elixirs out of vinegar. If anything, we're using minimal amounts of vinegar just to get that taste. It's not something that's giving us any significant amounts of fiber, any significant levels of protein, like soy. So, with highly processed soy that is used as a protein supplement, that's what's caused issue for people who are vegetarians and who eat lots of soy, because soy is very difficult to digest. Is vinegar difficult to digest? Of course not. It's a liquid. And then again, we're using it as a flavoring. And then if we looked at soy, traditionally it was fermented, whether it's fermented into a sauce or even fermented as a protein substitute, like tempeh or natto. Really what fermentation does is it pre-digests the food. So it's loaded with enzymes and things that allows your body to minimally do the work to break it down. So again, I'll finish with a paragraph from the McCullough article. Let me find it here. Because what do we like to do? We like to use vinegar to go to my Facebook. We like to use vinegar to put on our greens. One thing that apple cider vinegar is high in acetic acid. Like other acids, acetic acid can increase your body's absorption of important minerals from the food you eat. Therefore, it is possible that drinking a mild tonic of vinegar and water just before meals might improve your body's ability to absorb the essential minerals locked in foods. Apple cider vinegar might help you get more out of your leafy greens! Exclamation point. So I'll leave it there. And again, if you have anything to add or to dispute, please share, and let's continue the dialogue, because we're here to all learn from each other. Thank you.